They banned me from Thanksgiving. My own son's wife did it by text. 3 days out, 12 words. I read it once. I set the phone down. I didn't call. I didn't beg for a seat. I let the whole holiday go quiet. I let her think that was the end of it. It wasn't. She planned a $900 dinner. She told my son she'd handled everything. Meanwhile, a woman with a folder was already driving out from town, a pie in one hand, 4 years of paperwork in the other. My son's wife had listed a piece of land that was never hers to list. She just didn't know it yet. And at that table in front of her own mother, dessert came with a signature line. But before the folder, there was the text. My name is Roger Dean Vance. I am 72 years old. I've run cattle on this land since before my own son was born. I did not raise my voice once through any of what I'm about to tell you. I didn't need to. 3 days before Thanksgiving, my son's wife texted me one line. For the kids' sake, it's best if you sit this one out this year. I read it standing at my kitchen counter, in the house I built with my own hands 40-some years back. I set the phone down on the counter. I did not pick it back up. I want to tell you how a man gets to 72 years old, still standing on his own 2 feet, still able to read a cloud bank and call the weather before the radio does, and still ends up uninvited from his own family's dinner table. It didn't happen in one text, it happened over about a year, in small pieces, the way a fence line goes slack, one loose wire at a time, until one day the whole thing's down and the cattle are out in the road before you notice. I'm not going to pretend I didn't see some of it coming. I saw more of it than anybody gave me credit for. That's the thing nobody understood about me. Not my son, not his wife, not her people. They thought slow meant simple. They thought quiet meant finished. A man doesn't run 400 head of cattle on 1,000 acres for 50 years by being slow. And he doesn't stay solvent that whole time by being simple either. Let me take you back to where this actually started. It wasn't the text. It was a Tuesday morning in October. 6 weeks before that message came through, I was out on the north pasture at 5:30, moving cattle ahead of a storm the county hadn't even called yet. I'd been reading the sky since before some of these forecasters were born. The clouds had that flat grey underbelly, stacked low, moving too fast for the wind at ground level. I knew we had maybe 6 hours before the freeze hit hard. I got on the ATV, rode the fence line, brought 210 head down off the exposed ridge, into the lower pasture, where they'd have some windbreak. Took me 4 hours. My hip aches doing it. Has for 5 years now, ever since it gave out on me hauling feed in a bad winter. But I still do it. There's nobody else on this place who reads weather the way I do. And cattle left up on that ridge in a hard freeze is cattle you lose. The county's automated warning hit my phone at 11 that morning, 6 hours after I'd already moved the herd. I remember thinking, not for the first time, that most of what people call information these days is just somebody else catching up to what you already knew. That's who I am. That's the man they decided needed to be managed. Needed, in Brooks' words to my own son, to be handled around the kids. A man who reads a freeze 6 hours before the county apparently can't be trusted to sit at a dinner table without causing a scene. I want to be plain about something because it matters. I built Split Creek Ranch, not with money I inherited, not with a lucky break, not with anybody's help but my late wife's. I started 50 years ago with 80 leased acres and 11 head of cattle, bought with money I'd saved working feedlots since I was 16. 11 head. I remember every one of them. I remember what they cost me too. $3,200 in today's money. Money I did not have to spare. Today, Split Creek Ranch runs 400 head across 1,000 acres I own outright. The whole operation, land, cattle, water rights and improvements, was appraised 2 years ago at $2,400,000. I did every bit of the work that built that number with my own 2 hands, until my hip gave out. I branded every calf for 40 years. I strung every foot of fence on that north boundary myself, twice, after 2 different floods took it out. I dug the well that waters the lower pasture with a rented auger and 3 friends from the co-op, back before I could afford to hire it done. My wife Eleanor kept every ledger by hand for 42 years. Every calf sold, every dollar of feed bought, every water rights payment made. All of it in her handwriting. In composition books she bought a dime a dozen at the feed store. She used to say the land didn't care who worked it hardest. It only knew who showed up. She showed up every single day of our marriage, until the cancer took her 3 years back now. I tell you all that not to brag. I tell you that because you need to understand what the kids' sake sounded like, coming from a woman who married into this family 7 years ago and has never once, not once, asked to see the deed to anything. Her name is Brooke. She married my son Tyler 7 years back. I want to say plainly because I mean it plainly. For the first few years, I thought she was fine. A little quick to talk about money at the dinner table. A little quick to mention what other families had that we didn't. But fine. She ran a small event planning business out of Broken Bow, the county seat. She was good at it, or good enough. Weddings, birthday parties, the occasional corporate retreat for the insurance office in town. Somewhere in the last year and a half, that business started slipping. I didn't know the details then. I know them now, every dollar of them, because that's the kind of thing a man learns when people stop being careful in front of him. They thought he was too old, too slow, too confused to add it up. She'd taken out a loan against her and Tyler's own house, $58,000, to expand the business last year. New tents, new lighting rigs, a delivery van. 2 of her biggest contracts fell through this past fall. One alone cost her $11,000 in non-refundable deposits she'd already spent on supplies. By October, she was $22,000 behind on that loan, with a payment due the week after Thanksgiving she did not have. I didn't know any of that. On the Tuesday, I moved the cattle off the ridge. I found it out the way you find out most things worth knowing. Slowly, mostly by accident. Mostly because somebody who wasn't supposed to say anything said something anyway. That evening, after I got the herd settled and fed, I drove out to the little cemetery where Eleanor's buried, next to her parents, under the cottonwood she wanted planted over her, because she liked the sound cottonwoods make in wind. I sat there a while like I do most weeks, told her about the storm, told her the herd count, told her the ridge cattle came down fine. I do that. Some men think it's foolish, talking to a headstone. I don't care what they think. She kept this place running as much as I did. She deserves to hear how it's going. I was still out there when my phone rang. Tyler. Dad, he said. I could hear right off he wasn't calling with good news. Tyler's voice does a thing when he's about to disappoint somebody. It gets careful, gets slow, like he's picking his way across ice. Dad, I need to talk to you about Thanksgiving. I'm listening, I said. Brooke and I have been talking, he said. We think this year, maybe it'd be easier on everybody, if it was a smaller thing. Just us and the kids and Brooke's folks. I sat with that a second. The wind was moving through the cottonwood over Eleanor's grave, that long, low sound she loved. Smaller how, I said. Just, he said, and there was a long pause, just quieter. The kids get overwhelmed with too many people. And Brooke, with everything going on with her business, she just needs this one to be calm. Low stress. So I'm not invited, I said. I wasn't asking. I was confirming it out loud so there'd be no confusion later on either end of the phone. It's not like that, Dad. Tyler, I said, is it or is it not? The case that you are telling me not to come to Thanksgiving dinner. Another pause. Longer this time. Just let it go this year, Dad. Please. For the kids' sake, it's not worth a fight. I told him I understood. And I meant it, in the sense that I understood exactly what was happening, even if he didn't. Then I told him goodnight and hung up. I sat by Eleanor's grave another 20 minutes before I drove home. Some conversations need a minute to settle, before a man goes back out and acts normal. 3 days later, the text came from Brooke herself, 12 words. For the kids' sake, it's best if you sit this one out this year. Notice something about that sentence. I noticed it standing right there at my kitchen counter. She didn't say we, she didn't say we've decided. She said it's best, like she was reporting a weather pattern. Like it wasn't a decision anybody made, just a fact that arrived on its own. The way a freeze arrives, except she didn't see this one coming 6 hours out. She'd been building to it for months. I set the phone down. I did not text back. I did not call Tyler and argue. I want to be honest about why, because it matters for everything that comes after. I didn't stay quiet because I was too hurt to speak, though I was hurt. I stayed quiet because I've run this ranch long enough to know the worst thing you can do, when a storm's building and you can already read the sky, is start yelling at the clouds. You don't argue with weather. You get your herd in before it hits. You let the weather do what weather's going to do. Then you deal with what's left standing after. I don't chase the storm, I just get the herd in before it hits. That's not a line I made up for effect. That's how I've run this place for 50 years. And it's how I decided, standing at that counter, with the phone gone quiet in my hand, that I'd run whatever this was too. The truth is, some part of me had been waiting for this moment for close to a year. Not hoping for it, but not surprised by it either. The way you're not surprised when a fence post you've been eyeing all summer finally goes down in a windstorm. You knew the rot was in it. You just didn't know which storm would take it. Because 4 years ago, before any of this, before Brooke's business ever wobbled, before a single word about managing me ever got said in this family, I did something I never told my son about, never told Brooke about, never told a soul about, except the one person whose job it was to know. Eleanor's diagnosis had come back about 6 months before that. It changes a man, sitting across from a doctor, hearing words like that about the person you've built 40 years with. She lived another 2.5 years after that news. We made the most of every one of them. But from that day on, I started thinking hard about what this place would be after we were both gone. Who'd end up standing in the middle of it? Whether they deserved to be standing there. Eleanor said something to me, near the end, that I've turned over in my mind every day since. She said, "Don't let this place go to whoever's loudest at the table, Roger. Let it go to whoever's still standing in the barn at 5 a.m. I didn't fully understand it then. I understand it completely now. So 4 years ago, I drove into Broken Bow and sat down with Constance Marsh, who's handled my legal affairs for 15 years. I moved the land, the water rights, and the old homestead cabin, the 5 acres where my grandfather's original house still stands, into an irrevocable trust. Constance as trustee. My granddaughter June, Tyler's oldest, as the sole beneficiary. Tyler has never read that trust. To this day, as far as I know, he still thinks the ranch passes to him the ordinary way. Whenever I go, the way he'd expect, the way any son expects. Brooke doesn't know the trust exists at all. As far as she's ever known, that cabin and its 5 acres belong to Tyler. Outright. Part of what he'll inherit. Part of what's coming to them. I never explained why I did it. Eleanor always said the less you explain a thing before it's time, the less chance somebody talks you out of it. She was right about that too. All I ever let slip, once to Tyler, years back, walking the fence line near that cabin, was one line. That cabin never answered to anybody who couldn't read a deed. He laughed it off. Thought it was one of my old man sayings. I let him think that. I'm telling you all this in order, because I want you to understand something about the man Brooke decided, this past October, was too confused to sit at a Thanksgiving table. That man had already quietly moved every asset that mattered out of anybody's easy reach, 4 years before she ever needed to know it. That man reads a freeze 6 hours before the county does. That man does not chase a storm. He gets the herd in, then he waits to see who's left standing when it passes. The days after that text went by slower than I expected. I kept the ranch running the way I always do. Up before 5, coffee on the porch, watching the light come over the ridge, out checking fence and feed and water, same as any other week. Tyler called twice more in that stretch, each time with less to say than the last, each time sounding like a man trying to convince himself of something he didn't quite believe. "You doing okay, Dad?" he asked. The second call. "I'm fine, Tyler," I told him. And I was. That surprised me some, how fine I actually was, once the first sting wore off. A man spends 50 years building something. He gets used to the idea that the building itself is the reward, regardless of who claps for it. "Brooke feels bad about it," he said. With everything going on with the business, she just needs this one to be simple." I didn't ask him what everything going on with the business meant. I already had a guess. Guesses are cheap. I wanted facts. I've never once made a decision on a guess when I could wait 2 more days and get a fact instead. I got my first fact on a Thursday at the monthly co-op board meeting in town. I've sat on that board going on 20 years. It handles water rights and grazing allotments for about 40 ranching families in this county. Hank Ostrander's been the board secretary about as long as I've been a member. Hank hears things. Everybody tells Hank things, half without meaning to, because Hank's got one of those faces that looks like it isn't listening, even when it's listening hardest. After the meeting broke up, Hank caught me by my truck. That's Hank's way of telling you he's got something he doesn't want, said in front of the room. Roger, he said, you know anything about somebody shopping around a piece of your place? I told him I didn't know what he meant. Landbroker's been asking around town, Hank said. Fella named Dietrich works out of Cheyenne mostly. Does these bridge loan collateral deals. He was in the diner Tuesday asking old Pete Aldrich about the title history on that homestead cabin out on your property. The little one, off the county road, your granddad's old place. I stood there by my truck a second. Let that sit the way you let a fact sit before you react to it. Asking what, exactly? Just asking who held clear title, Hank said. Whether it was tied up in your bigger parcel or separate. Pete didn't know anything, told him so. But Pete mentioned it to me, and I figured you'd want to know somebody's poking around your paper. I thanked Hank, drove home that evening with the radio off, which I do when I need to think. Eleanor always said I think louder with the radio off. She wasn't wrong about that either. Somebody was asking about the title on a piece of land that, as far as everybody in this family believed, belonged to my son, would belong to my son, was going to be my son someday, the ordinary way. Somebody was asking that question 3 weeks before Brooke told me, for the kids' sake, to sit out the family holiday. I didn't call Tyler about it. I didn't call Brooke. I called Constance Marsh instead, from the porch, coffee in hand, watching the last of the evening light go off the ridge. Constance, I said, when she picked up, I need you to confirm something. The homestead cabin, the 5 acres, that's still clean inside the trust, correct? Nobody's touched it. Nobody's got any claim against it outside what we set up 4 years back. It's exactly where you left it, Roger, she said. Clean, recorded, untouched. Why? I told her what Hank told me. There was a pause on her end. The kind of pause a good lawyer takes when she's already 3 steps ahead of the conversation. I'll pull the county recorder's records tomorrow morning, she said. If somebody's asking about title on a parcel sitting inside an irrevocable trust they don't know exists, Roger, I want to know exactly what they think they're looking at before anybody makes a move they can't take back. I told her that sounded right. We hung up. I sat on that porch another hour after dark, going over 4 years of quiet decisions in my head, feeling, for the first time since Brooke's text, like I wasn't just standing still waiting for a storm to pass over me. I was starting to understand which storm it actually was. Constance called me back 2 days later. Saturday morning, I was in the shop replacing a worn bearing on the hay baler. I remember exactly what I was doing when the phone rang. A man remembers the small details, around the moment a fact changes everything he thought he knew. Roger, she said, I need you to sit down for this one. I'm standing in my shop holding a bearing, I told her. That's about as sat down as I get most days. The homestead cabin, Constance said. The 5 acres. There's an active listing on it, Roger. Not for sale. As collateral. Somebody's shopping it to a bridge lender. As security against a short-term loan. I set the bearing down on the workbench. Whose name is on the listing? The listing agent is Dietrich, she said. Same name your friend Hank mentioned. But the party who engaged him, the party claiming ownership interest sufficient to pledge the property. Roger, that's Brooke. I want to tell you honestly what went through me in that moment. I've thought about it 100 times since. It wasn't rage. Rage is loud, and I've never had much use for loud. What went through me was something colder and quieter. The same feeling I get out checking fence, when I find a post that looks solid from 6 feet away, but gives when I push on it. You realise the rot's been working through it longer than you knew. I thought, too, of every dollar this family had ever quietly leaned on me for, without ever asking outright. The $900 catering bill Brooke expected covered every single Thanksgiving. The $3,100 I'd spent fixing Tyler's fence line, without either of them knowing where the money came from. The $26,000 sitting in a college account for June that Brooke had never once thought to ask about. None of it loud, none of it announced. Just the steady, quiet math of a father who'd been holding up more of this family's weight than anybody at that table had bothered to count. She thinks she owns it, I said. She thinks Tyler owns it outright, Constance said, and that as his wife, she's got standing to pledge it. She doesn't know about the trust. There's no way she could. It's never been recorded anywhere she'd have access to it. Tyler's never seen the paperwork himself. How far along is this? Far enough that I'd call it serious, Constance said. The listing's been active 6 weeks. Dietrich's already run a preliminary appraisal. Valued the cabin and its 5 acres at $91,000. He's shopping it as collateral for a $45,000 bridge loan. My read, Roger, and you can push back, is that this was never about the holiday. This was about clearing you out of the way before that loan closes. I stood in my shop a long minute after we hung up, looking at that bearing on the workbench, thinking about timing. Brooke needed me quiet, needed me out of the family conversation, needed nobody asking questions about property lines right when a broker was 3 weeks from closing a loan against land that had never, not for one single day, belonged to her husband to pledge. For the kids' sake wasn't about the kids. It never had been. It was about clearing a path. I finished the bearing job that afternoon. A man still has to run a ranch even while he's turning over the biggest lie his family's ever told him. That evening, after supper, I went into the small office off the kitchen, the one Eleanor used for 42 years to keep her ledgers. I hadn't opened her old cedar chest of composition books in longer than I wanted to admit. I want to describe that room because it matters. One window facing east so the morning light hit her desk first thing. A roll top she'd had since before we married. Drawers that still smelled faintly of cedar and old ink. On the shelf above it, 42 composition books. One for every year we ran this place together. Her handwriting filling everyone. Small and neat, slanted slightly left, the way she always wrote. I pulled the box down that night looking for something specific. I knew roughly that somewhere in those ledgers she'd have notes about the cabin, about her feelings on inheritance, about things she used to say to me in the kitchen late at night, when the lights were low and the kids were grown, and it was just the two of us again. I found it in the second to last book she ever filled, the year before her diagnosis, tucked inside the front cover, folded twice, a single sheet of her stationery. Not part of the ledger itself, something she'd written separately and slipped in, like she meant for somebody to find it later, rather than read it right away. I read it standing at her old desk, under that east window, in a house gone quiet, the way houses go quiet, after the person who filled them with sound is gone. Roger, it said, if you're reading this, you've finally gone digging in these old books the way I always told you to. Good. Count the people who show up before the money and the people who show up after. This family will have both kinds in it someday. Don't let the loud ones convince you they were always the quiet ones. The land will tell you who really worked it. It always does. I sat with that letter a long while. It wasn't dated, but I knew. From the book it was tucked in. She'd written it sometime in the year before her diagnosis. Long before any of this with Brooke. Long before Tyler even married her. Eleanor had seen something coming that I hadn't yet. Or maybe she'd just always known people better than I did. Known what money does to a family. Long before money ever tests it. I folded that letter back up exactly the way I found it. Put it back in the cedar chest. But I kept the words with me the rest of that week. The way you keep a fence line coordinate in your head, even after you've walked past the post. The following Tuesday, at the co-op meeting, Hank caught me again by my truck. That broker's back in town, Hank said. Dietrich had lunch with somebody at the diner yesterday. Wasn't your son, though. Was a woman. Pete says she matched Brooke's description from the pictures on the event company's website. Anybody else there? I asked. Just the two of them, Hank said. Pete says she looked nervous the whole meal. Kept checking her phone. I thought about that a long time driving home. $22,000 behind on a $58,000 loan. Next payment due the week after Thanksgiving. And here she was, having lunch with a land broker about pledging a cabin that wasn't hers to pledge, while telling my son and the rest of the family that Thanksgiving needed to be small and quiet for the kids' sake. I called Tyler that Wednesday night, not to confront him. I still didn't think he knew, just to test the water gently, the way you test ice before you put your full weight on it. How's Brooke's business doing? I asked him, plain as anything over the phone. There was a pause. It's been a tough year, Tyler said. Slow season. She's handling it. She tell you she's behind on the loan? I asked, still plain, still calm. Another pause. Longer this time. What loan, Dad? And there it was. My own son didn't know his wife was $58,000 in debt against their own house. Didn't know she was $22,000 behind. Didn't know a broker in Cheyenne had valued a piece of family land at $91,000 and was shopping it against a bridge loan she needed closed inside 3 weeks. Forget I asked, I told him. I must have heard it wrong from somebody at the co-op. I hung up that call knowing two things I hadn't known walking into it. First, Brooke had kept her own husband as much in the dark as she'd kept me. Second, whatever conversation was coming, it needed to happen in front of both of them at once. Tyler deserved to hear the truth the same moment everybody else did, not filtered through his wife's version of events beforehand, I called Constance the next morning. I want to know everything, I told her. The exact filing date on our trust versus the exact date Brooke's broker first listed the cabin. I want dates, Constance, not guesses. I already pulled that, she said. The trust was recorded 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days before Dietrich filed his preliminary listing paperwork. It's not close, Roger. It's not even a fair fight. Good, I said. Then there's no ambiguity for anybody to argue about later. There's something else, Constance said. I checked the broker's paperwork more closely. He charged Brooke a listing fee, $1,200, up front. Non-refundable. Standard for these bridge collateral arrangements. She's already out that money, regardless of what happens next. I sat with that a second. $1,200 she didn't have. Spent on a listing for land she never owned. On top of the $22,000 she already owed. On top of the $11,000 she'd lost on the catering contracts that fell through. What do you want to do? Constance asked. We could stop this quietly right now. A letter to the broker, a cease and desist, done in a week. Nobody the wiser at your family table. I thought about that offer a long moment, sitting on my porch, looking out at the ridge where I'd moved the cattle 6 weeks before anybody else saw the storm coming. No, I said. I want it to happen where the lie got told. At that table, the one I wasn't invited to. Not to embarrass anybody for the sake of embarrassing them, but because Brooke told my whole family a story about protecting the kids. The truth deserves the same audience the lie got. Constance was quiet a moment. That's your call, Roger. I can have everything ready. But understand, once we do this in front of the family, there's no undoing it. No quiet fix afterward. Everybody at that table will know exactly what happened. Exactly when. Exactly why. I know, I said. I've known that since the day I moved the trust into your hands 4 years ago. I didn't build it to stay hidden forever. I built it to hold whenever it needed to. We talked through the details after that. What she'd bring, how she'd present it, the timing. Some part of me still hoped, even then, it wouldn't come to that Tyler would find some backbone before the day arrived. Call me himself, invite me back. Tell Brooke the truth mattered more than a quiet dinner. He didn't call. 3 more days passed. Then it was the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving. My phone rang one more time. Tyler again. This time his voice had a different shake to it. Not the careful ice-picking voice from before, something closer to relief. Or maybe just exhaustion. Dad, he said, Brooke wants me to tell you the seating's all worked out for tomorrow. Her parents, us, the kids. She said to tell you she hopes you understand. She's already got dessert ordered from that bakery you like. The pecan place, so it's like you're there in spirit. I stood on my porch, phone to my ear, looking out at land that's been in my family one way or another, going on 5 generations. I thought about Eleanor's letter in that cedar chest. About the herd I'd moved 6 hours before the county even saw the freeze coming. About a woman $22,000 in debt, telling my son everything was handled. Tell Brooke I appreciate the thought, I said. Tell her I hope everybody has a fine dinner. I hung up the phone, called Constance one more time that night, told her the plan was on for tomorrow, exactly as we'd laid it out. She'd drive out from Broken Bow with a pie of her own and a folder. Arrive right around dessert, the way we'd planned it down to the hour. You sure about this, Roger? She asked me one last time. I've been sure about it for 4 years, I told her. I just didn't know the date yet. Now I do. I want to tell you about the days between that phone call and Thanksgiving itself, because a lot happened in that stretch I haven't told you yet. None of what came next was as simple as one lawyer confirming one date on one piece of paper. The Friday after Constance told me about the 4-year gap, I drove into Broken Bow myself to her office. Some things a man needs to hear sitting across a desk, not over a phone line with cattle bawling in the background. Constance's office hadn't changed much in 15 years. Same oak desk, same view of the courthouse, same framed photograph on her wall of her late husband. A highway patrolman killed on duty some 20 years back, hit by a drunk driver on Route 26 during a routine stop. I mention that because Constance Marsh understands loss the way I understand it. Quiet and permanent, and never fully behind you. That shared understanding's part of why I trusted her with something this heavy in the first place. I want to show you something, she said once I'd sat down. She slid a folder across the desk. Not the folder she'd eventually carry to Tyler's table. Her working file. Everything she'd gathered so far. Inside were copies of the county recorder's filings. The original trust documents from 4 years back. My own signature on page after page. dated and notarized. Behind those, newer paper. Dietrich's preliminary listing agreement dated 6 weeks prior. Brooke's signature on it, clean and confident. The signature of a woman who believed completely in what she was signing. "Look at this line," Constance said, pointing to a clause near the bottom. She represented, in writing, that she held clear, equitable interest in the property, sufficient to pledge it as collateral. That's not just a mistake, Roger. That's a sworn representation to a lender. If this loan had closed and the lender later discovered the collateral was invalid, Brooke could have been looking at more than an embarrassing dinner. She could have been looking at fraud exposure, depending how aggressively the lender chose to pursue it. I sat with that a long moment. I want to be honest, some part of me felt a flicker of alarm. Not for Brooke's sake exactly, for Tyler's, for the children's. For whatever Brooke had done, whatever debt she'd buried, my grandchildren still had to live inside whatever consequences came down. "Can we stop it before it goes that far?" I asked. "We already have," Constance said. "I sent the cease and desist to Dietrich's firm this morning. The moment he's on notice the collateral is invalid, any further marketing exposes him to liability too, not just Brooke. My guess he pulls the listing within days, once his own lawyer reads what I sent him. That $45,000 bridge loan was never going to close on a lien against trust property anyway. No underwriter worth their license would have let it through once the title search came back. What we're really talking about isn't whether the loan closes. It's whether Brooke ever has to face, out loud in front of people who matter to her, that she built a plan on land she never owned. "And you think she should?" I said. It wasn't quite a question. Constance sat back and looked at me a long moment, the way she does when she's about to tell a client something they didn't ask to hear. "I think, Roger, that's not really a legal question. That's a family question. You're the only one qualified to answer it. My job is to tell you what the law allows. Your job is to decide what kind of grandfather, and father, and man you want to be on the other side of it." I drove home from that meeting with a lot on my mind. 2 days later, something happened that changed the shape of my thinking, more than almost anything else, in that whole stretch. I got a call, out of nowhere, from Brooke's own mother, Carol Ashworth. I'd met Carol maybe a dozen times over the 7 years of Tyler and Brooke's marriage. Pleasant enough at family gatherings. The kind of woman who compliments your cooking a little too enthusiastically. We'd never had a private conversation in our lives. "Roger," she said, when I picked up, "I hope you don't mind me calling. Tyler gave me your number a while back for an emergency. I suppose this feels like one, though I don't quite know how to explain why I'm calling." "Go ahead, Carol," I said. "I think something's wrong with Brooke," she said. Her voice had a strain in it I hadn't heard from her before. She's been different the last few months, snapping at the kids, not sleeping. Hi, Mie. Dean and I had dinner with them 2 weeks ago, and she barely touched her plate. Kept checking her phone, kept stepping outside to take calls she wouldn't explain. I asked her directly if the business was in trouble. She told me everything was fine. "Better than fine," she said. "But Roger, mothers know when their daughters are lying to them. I've known it for months. I just don't know what she's lying about." I sat with that a long moment, phone to my ear, looking out at my own ridgeline, thinking how strange it was that Brooke's own mother had noticed the exact shape of the wound before I ever told her a single fact. "Carol," I said carefully, "because I didn't yet know how much was mine to say, I think you should ask Brooke directly, sometime when it's just the two of you, whether she's taken out any loans against the house, or anything else that Tyler doesn't know about." There was a long silence on the line. "Oh, Roger," Carol finally said, quiet, like something in her had just confirmed a fear she'd been carrying without a name for it. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough it's going to come out one way or another," I told her. "It'd be better for everybody, especially your daughter, if it came out because she chose to say it, rather than because somebody else had to." I didn't tell Carol about the trust that day. Didn't tell her about Dietrich or the listing or the $22,000. That wasn't mine to hand her, not yet. Not before her own daughter had the chance to be honest with her first. But I hung up that call carrying a strange new weight, on top of everything else. Brooke wasn't the only person standing to lose something in all this. Her own mother had been quietly worried sick for months, watching a daughter she loved come apart and not knowing why. One more thing happened in that stretch of days, and it's the piece that finally settled, in my own mind, that what I was doing was right. Not just legally sound, right in the way that matters more than paperwork ever can. The Tuesday before Thanksgiving, June called me herself. Not a text this time, an actual phone call, unusual enough that I answered it standing up, the way you do when you sense something's different before you even know what. "Grandpa," she said, "can I ask you something? And you won't tell Mum I asked." "You can ask me anything," I told her. "Whether I tell your mum depends on what it is, but I'll always tell you the truth about that part first." She laughed a little, nervous. 13 years old and already better at reading a room than most adults I know. "Mum's been weird," she said. "Like really weird. She cries in the bathroom and thinks nobody hears her. She's been on the phone a lot with some guy about the cabin." "Our cabin, Grandpa, the one out by the creek. Is something wrong with it?" I stood very still a moment, holding the phone, understanding all at once that even my 13-year-old granddaughter had picked up on the exact shape of what was happening before anybody explained a word of it. "Nothing's wrong with the cabin," I told her, which was true in the most important sense there is. The cabin's exactly as safe as it's always been. I promise you that, June, and I've never once broken a promise to you in your whole life, have I? "No," she said, quiet. "Then trust me on this one too," I said. "Whatever's making your mum cry in the bathroom, it isn't the cabin. The cabin's fine. It's going to stay fine. You don't need to carry this one, June. That's my job, not yours." She was quiet a moment. Then she said something I've carried with me since. "Grandma used to say you always know when something's really wrong, because the grown-ups get quiet instead of loud. Everybody's been really quiet lately, Grandpa." I told her she was right, that her grandmother was right about almost everything. Being quiet, sometimes, is exactly how you know somebody's handling something carefully instead of carelessly. I told her to focus on her schoolwork and her friends, and let the grown-ups handle the grown-up parts. We talked a few more minutes about nothing in particular. Her science fair project, a horse she'd been riding at a friend's place. I hung up that call more certain than I'd been in weeks that whatever came next needed to happen soon. A 13-year-old girl was already carrying more of this family's tension than any child should have to carry, simply by being observant enough to notice what the adults around her were trying to hide. I called Constance again that same evening. "I want to move faster," I told her. "Not recklessly, but faster. There's a child in this who's already sensing something's wrong. I won't have her carrying that weight through the whole holiday, not knowing why." "I understand," Constance said. "I can be ready for Thursday. Everything's already gathered. The recorder's filings, the appraisal Dietrich commissioned, the cease and desist confirmation, your late wife's letter, notarized as an attachment, same as we discussed. All I need from you is the final word on timing. Thursday," I told her, "at their table. After the meal, before it ends. Exactly the way we talked about." "Then Thursday it is," Constance said. "One more piece. Before I take you to that Thursday, because it's the part of this whole stretch that surprised me most. I think it'll surprise you too." Wednesday evening, the night before Thanksgiving, I got a call from Hank Ostrander. Hank doesn't call just to chat. Hank calls when he's got something. "Roger," he said, "I don't know if this matters to whatever you've got going on, but I thought you'd want to know. Dietrich came through the co-op office today, asking to pull public water rights records on your parcel. Said he was doing due diligence for a client. I told him water rights on that parcel are current and fully paid. Zero owed. Same as they've been for 20 years, thanks to you staying ahead of every assessment the co-ops ever levied." He didn't seem to like hearing that. I thanked Hank. Sat with that a while after we hung up, thinking how thoroughly Brooke, and by extension, Dietrich, had misjudged what they were dealing with. They'd looked at an old cabin on a ranch and seen an asset nobody was watching closely enough to defend. They hadn't accounted for the fact I'd been watching every filing on that land for 50 years. That I paid every assessment before it was even due. That the water rights alone, worth nothing owed because I'd kept them worth nothing owed, were as clean as the day my grandfather first claimed them. That's the thing about people who've never built anything themselves. They see a quiet old man and a modest cabin and assume quiet means unguarded. They never stop to ask how a piece of land stays in one family for 100 years. It isn't luck, it's paying every bill on time, checking every filing every single year, never once assuming somebody else is watching the fence for you. Thanksgiving morning came in clear and cold, the way it does most years on the high plains, frost heavy on the fence wire, my breath showing in the barn light before the sun came up. I did the same chores I do every morning. Fed the herd, checked the water troughs for ice, walk the fence line on the north boundary out of habit more than need. A man doesn't stop checking his fence just because it's a holiday. I thought about Eleanor more that morning than I had in a long while. 42 Thanksgivings we spent together on this land, most of them with a full table. Her turkey recipe, her mother's stuffing, the good china that only came out twice a year. This was my third Thanksgiving without her, and my first, in 50 years of marriage and widowhood combined, spent without a single member of my own family at the table. I want to tell you one more thing about that morning, because it's the kind of small detail that tells you everything about a person, if you're paying attention. Hank mentioned it to me a few days later, having heard it secondhand from somebody at the bakery in town. Brooke had ordered the Thanksgiving catering that year. The sides and the desserts she didn't make herself, at a cost of $900. Every year before this one, without ever being asked, I'd quietly covered that bill myself, a habit from all the years I'd hosted the meal at my own table. This year, with me uninvited, she'd expected the same courtesy. Anyway, and had told the bakery to bill it to the usual account, which was mine. I let Constance handle that one too, a small line item in the larger accounting. But I want you to understand, even in banning me from the table, some part of Brooke still expected my money to set it. I thought about other numbers that morning too, sitting on my porch with my coffee. The $3,100 I'd quietly paid, 2 summers back, to repair the east pasture fence line on Tyler's side of the property, a job Brooke never knew I'd covered, believing instead that Tyler had saved for it himself. The $26,000 I'd put into a college fund for June, the year she was born, growing quietly in an account Brooke has never once asked about, because as far as she's ever known, all of my money moves through channels she doesn't have to think about. Small things next to the appraised value of the whole ranch, but each one a thread in the same weave, each one proof of a hand that had been quietly holding this family up in ways nobody at that Thanksgiving table had bothered to notice. I made myself a plate around noon, leftover roast from earlier in the week, some bread, coffee, sat at my own kitchen table in the house I built and ate alone. I won't pretend that didn't sting some, because it did. A man can be at peace with a decision and still feel the cold of it at the same time. Those aren't opposites, they're just both true. Around 1 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed. A text from June, 13 years old now, sharp as a tack. The one Eleanor's trust names as sole beneficiary of everything I built, though she has no idea that's true. Happy Thanksgiving. Grandpa, the text said. I wish you were here. Mum said it's for the kids, but I don't get it. You're the best part of every holiday. I sat with that text a long moment before answering it. 13 years old, and she'd already seen straight through something her own mother hadn't managed to hide from her, even while hiding it from everybody else. Happy Thanksgiving, June, I wrote back. You focus on your dinner and your family today. I'll see you soon. I love you very much. I meant every word of that. Whatever came next at that table, none of it was aimed at June. She was 13 years old. She deserved a grandfather who protected what mattered, without ever making her carry the weight of the adult's failures. That's a promise I made to myself long before that Thanksgiving. I kept it. Constance called me around 2:30. I'm about 20 minutes from their place, she said. Pie's in the passenger seat, folders in my bag. You still want me to wait until dessert's actually being served? Dessert, I told her. Let them finish the meal. Let Brooke feel like she pulled it off exactly the way she planned it. There's something important in that, Constance. I don't want to interrupt her triumph. I want her to finish it completely, then hand her the bill for it. You're a patient man, Roger Vance, Constance said. I've been patient for 50 years, I told her. Patience is the only thing that ever built anything real on this land. She laughed quiet, told me she'd call the moment it was done. We hung up. I sat on my porch in the cold afternoon light, waiting, the same way I'd waited on plenty of storms before, watching the sky for the first sign of movement. I want to tell you what those 20 minutes felt like, because a man telling you the truth ought to tell you the parts that don't make him look especially brave, not just the parts that do. I wasn't calm the whole time. I want to be honest about that. I don't chase storms, that's true, but waiting for one to break is its own kind of hard, even for a man who's done it his whole life. I sat on that porch with my coffee going cold. I thought about 100 ways it could go wrong. Maybe Brooke would deny everything, call Constance a liar in front of her own parents, drag the whole thing into a shouting match that scared the kids. Maybe Tyler would side with his wife out of habit. the way a man sometimes does, even when some part of him knows better. Maybe June would be sitting right there watching all of it happen and carry that memory the rest of her life. I called Hank, of all people, in that stretch of waiting. A man needs somebody to talk to when he's sitting on a decision this big. "You doing all right, Roger?" Hank asked when he picked up. I could hear his own family's Thanksgiving going on behind him. Dishes clattering. Somebody's kids laughing. "I will be," I told him, "just waiting on some news." "The cabin thing," Hank said. It wasn't a question. Hank's sharper than he lets on. Always has been. "The cabin thing," I confirmed. "For what it's worth," Hank said. "And I don't say this lightly, Roger. I've watched you run that co-op board fair for 20 years. Never once seen you take more than your share. Never once seen you cut a corner on another rancher's water rights just because you could have gotten away with it. Whatever you're doing today, I'd bet the ranch it's fair too." I thanked him for that. More than he probably knew. There's something about hearing a man you respect vouch for your character on the very day you're about to test it that settles a nerve you didn't know was still jumping. "Go on and get back to your family," I told him. "Mine's about to have a conversation. I've been waiting 4 years to let happen." I hung up with Hank, sat another few minutes in the cold, watching the light lean west over the ridge the way it does in late November. Gold and low, already thinking about winter. Then my phone rang again. Constance. Her voice had a particular calm to it, the calm of a professional who's just finished a job cleanly. "It's done," she said. "I'm back in my car. I want to walk you through exactly how it went. In order. I think you'll want every detail." "Go ahead," I told her. Constance walked me through her own account first. The drive out, the porch, the doorbell. The moment Brooke's face changed when she said the words trustee and irrevocable. I'd get the fuller picture an hour later from Tyler himself, standing in my own kitchen. But Constance's version, clipped and precise, gave me the shape of it first, the way a good surveyor gives you the shape of a property before you walk the actual ground. "How did Brooke take it?" I asked her. That was the part I genuinely didn't know how to picture ahead of time. "About how you'd expect," Constance said. Denial first, then anger. Briefly, more at the situation than at me directly. Then something I call the beginning of shame, though I want to be careful saying that shame is a private thing, and I only saw the outside of it. She went very quiet toward the end. I think the letter did more to her than the legal facts did, if I'm honest. Facts people can argue with. Your late wife's actual handwriting. Read aloud at her own table. That's harder to argue with. I sat with that a long moment, thinking about Eleanor's composition books up in that office. 42 years of her handwriting. How strange and right it felt that her words, written years before any of this happened, ended up being the sharpest instrument in the whole folder. "And Tyler?" I asked. "How did he take it?" "He didn't say much while I was there," Constance said. "But I watched him the whole time, Roger, the way you learn to watch a room in this line of work. He wasn't angry at me for bringing it. He wasn't even angry at his wife, not the way I expected. He looked like a man doing fast arithmetic on the last several months of his own life, realising how much of it he'd taken on faith that maybe he shouldn't have. I thank Constance for everything. 4 years of quiet, careful work. A folder assembled with more precision than most people bring to anything in their lives. We agreed she'd send the written summary the following week for my own records, and we hung up. Now let me tell you what actually happened at that table. In order, the way Tyler told it to me later that same night, sitting across from me at my own kitchen counter with a coffee he never got around to drinking. The dinner, by all accounts, had gone exactly the way Brooke wanted it to go. Her parents, Carol and Dean Ashworth, drove in from 2 counties over. The kids, June and her younger brother Wyatt, sat at the far end of the table. Tyler carved the turkey. A habit he'd picked up watching me do it every year of his childhood, though nobody at that table thought to mention where he'd learned it. Brooke, by Tyler's account, spent a good part of the meal talking about her business. Upbeat, he said, telling her parents about a big new client for the spring wedding season, about how the slow patch was just temporary, about how things were going to turn around soon, now that some new financing had come through. Carol Ashworth raised her wine glass at one point, made a toast to Brooke, she said, who never lets anything slow her down, and to family taking care of family, especially this time of year. Tyler said he remembers looking down the table at that moment, noticing the empty chair where I'd have sat for the last however many Thanksgivings. Something twisted in him he couldn't quite name, though he could name it clear enough by the time he told Constance about it later. Dessert came out around 4:15. Brooke had the pecan pie from the bakery I like, sitting proud on the counter, along with two she'd made herself. Tyler said she was in the middle of cutting the first slice when the doorbell rang. Nobody was expecting anybody. Brooke, Tyler said, actually laughed a little. Said something like, "Who on earth?" and went to answer it herself, drying her hands on a dish towel. Constance Marsh stood on the porch holding a pie of her own and a leather folder tucked under her other arm. "Happy Thanksgiving," Constance said, by Tyler's account. "I'm sorry to intrude on your dinner. My name is Constance Marsh. I'm an attorney representing Roger Vance's estate. I believe most of you know who that is." Tyler said the room went quiet the moment those words carried down the hallway. Brooke's face did something he'd never seen before. Went pale, then very still. The way a face goes when it's doing fast math, it doesn't want to be doing. Constance told me later she kept her voice gentle the whole time. Never raised, never sharp. "I brought a pie," she said, setting it on the counter next to Brooke's, because Roger wanted the day to still have something sweet in it for everyone at this table, including the children. "And I brought this folder because there's a matter of record that needs addressing today, while everyone who should hear it is in the same room." "Brooke," Tyler said, tried at first to keep her composure. Tried to usher Constance toward the door. Said something about how this really wasn't the time. Constance, gentle as ever, didn't move. "I understand this is unexpected," Constance said, "and I'll be as brief as I can, but I think everyone at this table deserves to hear this together, rather than in pieces, later, from different directions." That's when Brooke's mother, Carol, stood up from the table, wineglass still in hand, and asked what on earth this was about. And that's when Constance Marsh opened the folder. I want to stop here a moment before I tell you what was inside it. Take you back further than that Thanksgiving table. Back to the actual 4 years of quiet decisions that put that folder in Constance's hands in the first place. The folder wasn't the story. The folder was just the last page of a much longer one. If you don't understand what came before it, the moment it opened won't mean what it should to you. I told you Eleanor's diagnosis came back about 6 months before I moved the land into trust. I want to tell you what those 6 months actually looked like. A man doesn't make a decision like that in one afternoon. He makes it slowly, the way you build anything meant to last. Eleanor and I drove to the specialist in Cheyenne 3 times that spring, 110 miles each way. Each drive back was quieter than the one before it. She never once complained. She'd look out the window at the land going by, all that open country, and talk instead about small things. The carving numbers, whether the well pump needed servicing, a recipe she wanted to try for the church potluck. I understood even then she was choosing to spend what time she had left thinking about the things that mattered to her, rather than the thing that was killing her. It was on the 3rd drive home, somewhere past Chugwater, that she said the thing about the barn at 5 in the morning. I remember exactly where we were, a long straight stretch, nothing but fence posts and sky on either side. That's the kind of thing you remember, when somebody you love reshapes the rest of your life, in 11 words. Don't let this place go to whoever's loudest at the table, Roger. Let it go to whoever's still standing in the barn at 5 in the morning. I asked her what she meant exactly. Eleanor rarely spoke in riddles. When she did, she always meant something specific. "Tyler's a good boy," she said, "but he's soft in a way that worries me, Roger. Not soft like weak, soft like clay before it's fired. He can still be shaped by whoever's got the strongest hands around him. I don't know who those hands will belong to yet. Might be somebody good. Might not." I didn't argue with her. I never did when she talked like that. In 42 years of marriage, she was right about people more often than I ever was. I ran cattle and read weather and built fences. She read people the way I read the sky. "What do you want me to do?" I asked her. "Protect June," she said. Our granddaughter was 9 years old at the time. Not because she's better than Wyatt, or better than anybody else. Because she's the one who already gets up early with you. She's the one who asks about the ledgers. She's the one who's going to be standing in that barn at 5 in the morning, long after everybody else who wanted a piece of this place has gone looking for something easier. I sat with that the rest of the drive home, and for another 2 weeks after, before I finally called Constance Marsh and told her I wanted to talk about an irrevocable trust. Constance, I should tell you, is not a young woman herself, 61 that year. been practicing law in Broken Bow for over 30 of them, most of it estate and property work for ranching families exactly like mine. She'd handled 2 generations of Vance paperwork before me. My own father's estate, back when I was younger than Tyler is now. She knew this land, knew this family, knew the particular way money and grief tangle themselves together in a place like this. You understand what irrevocable means, she said to me. That first meeting, sitting across her big oak desk with the courthouse visible out her window. Once it's done, Roger, it's done. You can't undo it if you change your mind in 5 years. You can't undo it if Tyler proves himself in ways you don't expect right now. This isn't a decision you get to walk back. I understand, I told her. And you understand, she said, that if your son ever finds out you did this without telling him, some part of him may feel like you didn't trust him. I sat with that a long moment. It was the truest, hardest thing anybody said to me through that whole process. I trust Tyler, I told her. I don't yet know who he'll be married to in 10 years or 20, or what pressure that person might put him under when I'm not here to see it. Eleanor's worried about that. When Eleanor worries about something, I've learned to worry about it too. We drew up the paperwork over the following 6 weeks. The land, all 1,000 acres of the working ranch, stayed in my name, to be handled by my regular, will the ordinary way, passing eventually to Tyler as anybody would expect. But the homestead cabin, the original 5 acres my grandfather homesteaded back in the 1920s, the oldest and most sentimental piece of the whole property that went into the irrevocable trust. Constance as trustee, June as sole beneficiary, not accessible, not sellable, not pledgeable by anybody but Constance, acting on the trust's terms until June turned 25 years old. I remember signing that paperwork on a Tuesday afternoon in March, 4 years before any of what happened at that Thanksgiving table. I felt a strange mix of things at once. Relief because I'd finally acted on Eleanor's warning instead of just turning it over in my head. Grief because my wife was dying, and this was her way of making sure the people who loved this place still had a claim to it after we were both gone. And something like guilt too, because I was shaping my son's marriage and his family's future without him ever knowing it happened. Eleanor died 14 months later. I sat by her bed those last weeks, in the room we'd shared for over 4 decades. She never once brought up the trust again. She didn't need to. She trusted that I'd done it. Once Eleanor Vance trusted you'd done something, she moved on to the next thing. In her last weeks, that was mostly making sure I knew how to keep her sourdough starter alive. A piece of practical wisdom I still use today. It has nothing to do with any of this, except it reminds you the woman who wrote that letter about counting the people who show up was thinking about bread starters and property trusts in the very same stretch of days. That's who she was. Always both things at once, tender and precise. Tyler married Brooke about 8 months after Eleanor passed. I want to be fair here. Fairness matters to me. Brooke was in those early years a good partner to my son in a lot of ordinary ways. She kept their house clean and warm. She was good with the kids when they came along. She showed up to family gatherings, brought dishes, laughed at my old jokes even when they weren't especially funny. What I noticed, slowly, over those 7 years, was a certain arithmetic that ran under everything she said. She'd mention at dinner what her cousin's husband made at his job in Denver. She'd mention, driving past a bigger house in town, how nice it would be to have room to really live. She never asked me directly for anything. She was smarter than that. But she talked, constantly, in the language of what things were worth, what things should be worth, what her own family had that ours somehow didn't measure up to. I watched Tyler get quieter around her over those years. The way a man gets quiet when he's stopped arguing a point he used to argue. Not because he agrees, because arguing costs more than it's worth to him anymore. I've seen that happen to other men in this county, married into families that valued a different currency than the one they were raised on. It rarely ends well for the man in the middle. I remember one dinner in particular, maybe 4 years into their marriage, before any of the business trouble started. I think about it differently now than I did at the time. Brooke's cousin had just closed on a house in a new development outside Denver. One of those big places with a 3-car garage and a pool. Brooke brought it up twice during the meal. Unprompted. Comparing square footage. Comparing the school district. Comparing, without ever quite saying it outright, what her own life looked like against what her cousins did. Tyler had laughed it off that night. Said something like, "We're not in a competition, babe. Brooke laughed too, but I watched her face in the lamplight, and I saw something there that wasn't really about her cousin's house at all. It was about a woman who'd grown up, from what little Tyler ever told me, in a family that measured love partly in appearances, in what the neighbours could see from the street. She'd married into a ranching family that measured things differently, in acres and cattle counts, in how long a fence held through a hard winter. She'd never quite figured out how to translate one kind of wealth into the other kind of currency she'd been raised to value. I don't say that to excuse what she did later. A grown woman is responsible for her own choices. Plenty of people grow up measuring the wrong things and still manage not to lie to a lender about property they don't own. But I understood watching her that night, 4 years before any of this came to a head, that there was a hunger in her this family's kind of wealth was never going to satisfy. It wasn't built to be seen the way she wanted it seen. It was built to be worked, to hold, to pass quietly from one generation to the next, without ever needing anybody's admiration to make it real. That hunger, I think now, is what eventually led her to Dietrich's office in Cheyenne, to a bridge loan and a listing fee and a sworn representation she had no legal right to make. Not evil exactly, just a woman convinced deep down that the family she married into owed her a kind of visible, spendable prosperity it was never built to provide on her timeline. Willing, in the end, to reach for it in a way that put everything at risk. I don't blame Tyler for that softness Eleanor named years before it ever mattered. I blame myself some, if I'm honest, for not paying closer attention while it was happening. For assuming a grown man could manage his own marriage without his father hovering over it. But I don't regret the trust. Not for one single day. Whatever softened in Tyler over those 7 years, it never touched the one thing Eleanor asked me to protect. And it never would. It was never his to soften in the first place. That's what was sitting in Constance Marsh's folder on that Thanksgiving afternoon, when Carol Ashworth stood up from the table with her wineglass, asking what on earth this was about. 4 years of quiet decision-making. One dying woman's warning about loud voices and early mornings. A grandfather's promise, kept in silence, longer than most promises get kept in this world. And now, finally, a folder, opening on a kitchen counter, in front of everybody who needed to see it. Before I tell you what Constance read out loud, I need to back up one more time. There's a piece of this I haven't told you yet, and it matters more than almost anything else in this whole story. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, the same evening Tyler called to say dessert would arrive in spirit, I drove out to the homestead cabin myself. I hadn't been out there in a few months. Something in me needed to walk that ground one more time before whatever was coming actually came. The cabin sits about 1.5 miles off the county road, down a 2-track that gets rough in wet weather, tucked into a stand of cottonwoods, along the same creek that gives the ranch its name. My grandfather built it by hand in 1926, the year he homesteaded this ground. Log and stone. A single room downstairs, a sleeping loft above, a wood stove that still draws clean if you know how to lay the fire right. My father was born in that cabin. I spent my own boyhood summers in it, before we built the main house. Eleanor and I honeymooned there. 4 nights, no running water, no electricity. Just the creek and the cottonwoods, and each other. We couldn't afford anything grander, and didn't want anything grander. Anyway, I let myself in with the key I've carried on my ring for 50 years. Cold inside, the particular cold of a building nobody's heated in months. But dry, sound, the roof still tight. The way my grandfather built things to be tight for 100 years, not 10. I stood in that single room a long while, in the dark, thinking about Brooke's broker valuing this place at $91,000, thinking about a bridge loan and a listing fee, and a woman $22,000 behind on a debt she'd never told her own husband about. All of it circling around 4 walls my grandfather built with an axe and a crosscut saw, and a stubbornness that apparently runs in this family. On the mantel above the stone hearth, there's a small tin box, been there as long as I can remember. Holds a handful of things that matter more than their worth. My grandfather's pocket watch, stopped decades ago. A photograph of my parents on their wedding day, faded soft at the edges. And since about 3 years back, a folded piece of paper I put there myself, not long after Eleanor passed. A private thing I never told anyone about. Not Tyler, not Constance, not a soul. I opened that tin box that Wednesday night, took the paper out, read it one more time by flashlight, sitting on the old bench Eleanor and I used to eat breakfast on, during those 4 honeymoon mornings, 60 years before, still in that same cabin. It was a letter I wrote to June, the year she turned 10, not long after the trust was finalised. Meant for her to read someday, when she was old enough to understand what it meant. I never gave it to her. I always meant to leave it in Constance's keeping, to be delivered when June turned 25 and the trust matured into her full ownership. But something made me want to read it again that Wednesday night, alone in that cold cabin, the night before everything came to a head. June, it said, by the time you read this, you'll be 25 years old and this cabin will be entirely yours, free and clear, the way your great-great-grandfather built it to be somebody's someday. I want you to know why I chose you, and it isn't because I love you more than your brother or more than your father. It's because your grandmother watched you, from the time you could barely walk, follow her into the barn at 5 a.m. without ever being asked. She used to say the land doesn't care who works it hardest, it only knows who shows up. You showed up before you could even read a clock. That's why this is yours. Not because anybody else did something wrong. Because you already did something right, before you knew there was anything to prove. I folded that letter back into the tin box, locked the cabin behind me, drove home in the dark. Whatever nerves I had left about the next day, they settled some on that drive. Whatever happened at that Thanksgiving table, whatever Brooke said or didn't say, the actual heart of what I'd built 4 years ago was never really about punishing anybody. It was about a 9-year-old girl who followed her grandmother into a barn before dawn. A promise made on a long, straight stretch of highway past Chugwater. A piece of land that was always going to end up exactly where it belonged, no matter how loud anybody got at any table along the way. That's the part of this story that never made it into the folder Constance carried into Tyler and Brooke's kitchen that Thursday afternoon. The folder had deeds and dates and dollar figures, all the facts anybody needed to understand what happened and why. But the letter in the tin box, that was the reason, underneath the reasons. I want you to have both. A man's actions only make full sense once you understand what he was actually protecting. Now, back to that kitchen. Carol Ashworth standing with her wineglass, asking what on earth this was about. Constance told me later she took a breath before answering. She wanted her words measured. No ambiguity in them at all. 6 weeks ago, Constance said, addressing the whole table. A land broker named Dietrich, operating out of Cheyenne, began marketing a 5-acre parcel on Split Creek Ranch, commonly known as the Homestead Cabin, as collateral for a $45,000 bridge loan. The party who engaged Mr. Dietrich's services and who represented herself as having ownership interests sufficient to pledge that property was Brooke Vance. Tyler said the room went dead silent at that. Brooke's father, Dean Ashworth, set his fork down slowly, the way a man does when he senses the ground under a conversation shifting somewhere he doesn't like. That's not, Brooke started, then stopped, then started again. That property is part of what Tyler's going to inherit. I have every right to explore financing options against assets that belong to our family. That would be true, Constance said. Still gentle, still even, if the property belonged to your family in the way you believe it does. It doesn't. 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days before Mr. Dietrich filed his preliminary listing paperwork, that parcel, the cabin and its 5 acres, was placed into an irrevocable trust by Roger Vance. I am the trustee. The sole beneficiary is June Vance, your daughter. Tyler said his own face went through something complicated in that moment, watching his wife absorb what had just been said, feeling it land in himself at almost the same instant. A strange double blow, learning at once that the cabin was never his to inherit the ordinary way, and that his wife had tried to pledge it anyway, believing it was. That's not possible, Brooke said, her voice climbing now, the first crack in the composure she'd worn all through dinner. Roger never said anything about a trust. Nobody ever told us. You weren't required to be told, Constance said. It's Roger's land. He was under no obligation to disclose his estate planning to you, or to Tyler, prior to his own choosing. What I am obligated to tell you today, now that a third party has attempted to encumber trust property without authority to do so, is that the listing is void, has always been void. Mr. Dietrich's firm has already been notified in writing this morning that any further marketing of that parcel will result in a formal complaint to the State Real Estate Commission. Carol Ashworth, Tyler said, sat back down slowly, wineglass still in hand, untouched now. Dean Ashworth, Brooke's father, spoke up for the first time since the doorbell rang. Tyler said his voice had a hard edge to it. The sound of a man trying to protect his daughter with the only tool he had left, which was volume. "This is absurd," Dean said. "You're telling us a piece of family property got locked away in some trust nobody ever heard of, and now you're standing in our kitchen on a holiday reading us legal documents." Roger's had 4 years to mention this to his own son. 4 years, and not a word. "What kind of father does that?" Tyler said. Constance answered that one calmly. No heat in her voice at all. The way you'd correct a small error on a form. The kind of father, she said, who watched his son's marriage take on financial strain his son didn't know about, and decided, 4 years before any of it mattered, to make sure one piece of this family's legacy could never be put at risk by a debt nobody in this family had even incurred yet. "I'd ask you to consider, Mr. Ashworth, whether the 4 years of silence protected this family, or whether the 6 weeks of silence from your daughter's side put it in danger." Tyler said that landed hard enough that Dean didn't have an answer ready. Sat back in his chair, jaw tight, saying nothing more. Brooke, Tyler said, had gone very pale by this point, both hands flat on the table, like she needed something solid under them. "I didn't know," she said, quiet now, all the earlier heat gone out of her voice. "I swear to you, I didn't know there was a trust. I genuinely thought that cabin was going to be Tyler's someday, the same as everything else." "I believe that you believed it," Constance said. "I want to be fair to you, Mrs. Vance. Nothing about this suggests you set out to defraud anyone knowingly, but belief isn't the same as ownership, and the loan you were pursuing against that belief was real. It was 6 weeks from potentially closing on a property you never had the right to pledge. That's the part that needed to be addressed today, regardless of intent." Tyler said the kids, June and Wyatt, had gone quiet at the far end of the table through all of this. Through all of the particular quiet of children who understand, without fully understanding the words, that something serious is happening. June, in particular, kept looking back and forth between her mother and Constance, her face doing the careful math of a girl old enough to sense the shape of a crisis, even if she couldn't yet name every piece of it. "Is Grandpa in trouble?" June finally asked, into the silence, her voice small. Tyler said that question did something to the room nothing else had managed yet. Brooke's face crumpled at it, genuinely crumpled. Her own daughter's first instinct, hearing a lawyer read legal facts out loud at the table, was to worry about the grandfather who wasn't even present, rather than about her own mother sitting right there. "No, sweetheart," Constance said, gentle now, crouching slightly to be closer to June's eye level. "Your grandfather isn't in any trouble at all. He's actually the one who made sure this cabin would always be safe. A long time ago. Long before anybody needed it to be. I'm just here to make sure everybody understands that today." June nodded slowly. Tyler said something shifted in her face too. Something like relief, mixed with a wariness that hadn't been there an hour before. "There's one more matter," Constance said, and reached into the folder for the second piece of paper. "Tyler told me later this part hit the table harder than anything about deeds or trusts or listing fees. It wasn't legal language at all. It was his own mother's handwriting, notarized as an attachment to the original trust filing, so her words carried the same weight as everything else in that folder. "Roger asked me to read this," Constance said, "since Eleanor isn't here to read it herself." And she read it. Eleanor's note, the one I found in her ledger 3 years before. Word for word, in front of Brooke and her parents, and my own son. Count the people who show up before the money, and the people who show up after. This family will have both kinds in it someday. Don't let the loud ones convince you they were always the quiet ones. The land will tell you who really worked it. It always does." Tyler said his mother's words, read aloud in a stranger's calm, even voice, at his own dinner table, landed harder than any legal fact Constance had stated so far. Carol Ashworth started crying quietly into her napkin. He wasn't sure if it was shame or simple shock. Brooke herself sat very still, staring down at the tablecloth, and didn't say a single word for almost a full minute. I want to pause here and say plainly, I never asked Constance to make anybody cry. I never asked her to humiliate Brooke or her mother, or embarrass anybody for sport. I asked her to bring the truth to the same table where the lie had been told. That felt like the only fair way to close the loop Brooke opened 3 weeks earlier with 12 words on a phone screen. What people did with that truth once it arrived, how they carried it, whether it broke them open or just broke something they'd been pretending was whole, that was never mine to control. Never mine to want, either way. "Is there anything you'd like me to relay back to Mr. Vance?" Constance finally asked. her business concluded, her voice gentler now than through the whole reading. Nobody answered right away, Tyler said. Then he stood up from his own chair, the one where he'd sat quiet through his mother's words being read aloud by somebody else, and said, "Tell my dad I'm coming to see him tonight. Tell him I'm sorry it took a letter from Mum to make me finally ask the right questions." Constance thanked the table for their time, left the pecan pie she'd brought on the counter next to Brooks, drove the 9 miles back out to Split Creek Ranch, where I was sitting at my own kitchen table, alone, finishing a cold plate of turkey and stuffing, waiting for the phone to ring. It rang around 6 that evening. Constance first walking me through everything I've just told you, word for word, the same way Tyler later confirmed it himself. Then, an hour after that, headlights came up my long driveway in the dark. Tyler standing on my porch in the cold, no coat like he'd left in too much of a hurry to grab one. I opened the door before he could knock. "Dad," he said and stopped, like he didn't quite know where to start, after driving 9 miles with, I imagine, 100 different opening lines running through his head. Coming out of the cold, I told him, "There's coffee." We sat at my kitchen table, the same one I'd eaten my lonely Thanksgiving plate at a few hours before. Tyler put his head in his hands, a long moment before he said anything else. "I didn't know," he said, "about the loan, about the broker, about any of it. I want you to believe that, Dad. I believe you," I told him. And I meant it. Constance's research had already confirmed as much. Every conversation Brooke had with Dietrich, every dollar of that loan, every quiet arrangement toward the bridge financing, had happened without Tyler's name on a single document. Without his signature anywhere. Without, as far as anyone could tell, his knowledge at all. "She told me Thanksgiving needed to be small because of the kids," Tyler said. "She told me you'd been getting harder to manage, forgetting things. She said it so many times I started to wonder if maybe she was right, if maybe I just hadn't noticed you slipping. Because I see you too often to catch it." I sat with that a moment. It stung more than almost anything else that whole day, more than the ban from dinner, more than the broker, more than the 12-word text. My own son had been quietly convinced, over months, that his father was losing his grip, based on nothing but his wife's repeated insistence that it was so. "Tyler," I said, "I moved cattle off the North Ridge 6 weeks before the county even issued a freeze warning. I've read every water rights filing on this ranch personally for 50 years. I found the trouble in Brooks' business before you did, and I found it the honest way, by asking a friend a question and getting an honest answer, not by snooping through anybody's phone. Does that sound like a man who's losing his grip to you?" Tyler shook his head slowly. I watched something shift in his face, the particular look of a man realizing he's been standing on ground that was never as solid as he thought. "Why didn't you tell me about the trust?" he asked. 4 years, Dad. 4 years and you never said a word. Because your mother asked me to protect June before either of us knew we'd need to," I told him. "And because, Tyler, if I'm honest, I wasn't sure yet what kind of pressure you'd be under by the time it mattered. I didn't know Brooke would end up where she ended up. I hoped she wouldn't. But your mother taught me a long time ago that hope isn't a plan, and love isn't the same thing as trust. Sometimes you protect the people you love most by not telling them everything. Not because you don't trust them, because you don't yet know who else might be listening when they repeat it." Tyler sat with that a long while, turning his coffee cup slowly on the table, not drinking it. "What happens now?" he finally asked. "With Brooke? With us?" "That's not mine to decide," I told him. "That's between you and her. Whatever you two work out about honesty and money and what a marriage is supposed to survive. What I can tell you is this. The cabin was never going to be sold out from under this family, no matter what happened at your table tonight. That much was settled 4 years ago. No broker in Cheyenne was ever going to change it. What's not settled is whether you and I are going to sit at the same table again, going forward. That part, Tyler, is entirely up to you." He looked at me a long moment, something in his face, tired and a little broken, but honest in a way I hadn't seen from him in longer than I wanted to admit, settled into something like resolve. "I want that table back," he said. "I want it back for real, Dad. Not because Mom's letter shamed me into it tonight, because I should have asked the right questions a long time before tonight, and I didn't. That's on me, and not just on Brooke. I told him I was glad to hear it. I meant that too. I want to be plain about something. I never wanted to lose my son over any of this. Not for one single day, not even at the worst of it. Not even reading that 12-word text at my kitchen counter 3 weeks before. The whole architecture I built, the trust, the timing, the folder at the table, all of it was built to protect what mattered without ever having to raise my voice. And to leave a door open, even a narrow one, for my own boy to walk back through, once he was ready to see clearly what he'd been standing in the middle of. That night, Tyler stayed another hour. We didn't talk much more about Brooke or the broker or the trust. We talked about small things, the way men do when the big things have already been said. He asked about the herd count. I told him about the freeze I'd read 6 weeks out. He laughed for the first time all night. Said he still didn't know how I did that. Reading weather before the weather itself seemed to know what it was going to do. Your mother used to say the same thing about you reading people. I told him. Guess we all got half the gift each. He left a little after 9. I stood on my porch a long while after his taillights disappeared down the driveway, looking up at a sky gone clear and hard, full of stars the way it only gets out here, far from any town's lights. I thought about Eleanor, about June, about a tin box on a mantel a mile and a half away, holding a letter that wouldn't be read for another 12 years, about how strange it is, the shape justice takes sometimes. Not loud, not even especially satisfying. In the moment, just quiet and correct. And finally, after 4 years of waiting, exactly where it needed to be. I want to tell you what happened over the weeks that followed, because a story like this doesn't really end at the dinner table. It ends in the slow, procedural ways real consequences actually land. The ways that don't make for dramatic television but make for a true accounting of what a lie actually costs. Dietrich's firm withdrew the cabin listing formally within 4 days of Constance's cease and desist letter, exactly as she predicted. His own attorney, I later learned, advised him to distance himself from the matter entirely and refund what could be refunded, though the initial $1,200 listing fee Brooke had already paid was, per the original agreement, non-refundable. $1,200 gone, on a listing that was void from the moment it was filed. Constance told me Dietrich's firm also quietly flagged the file internally, and word travels fast in that particular business. I heard, second-hand, through Hank, that 2 other ranching families in the county, who'd been approached by that same broker in past years, suddenly found him a good deal less persistent about following up. Brooke's original loan, the $58,000 borrowed against her and Tyler's house, came under a different kind of scrutiny about 10 days after Thanksgiving. Once the bridge loan scheme collapsed, and the $22,000 of missed payments could no longer be quietly patched over with a loan against property she didn't own, the original lender opened a formal review of the account. Constance explained it to me this way. $18,000 in Brooke's business accounts got frozen pending that review. Not as a punishment exactly. Standard procedure. Once a lender learns a borrower attempted to pledge invalid collateral elsewhere. Whatever cushion Brooke thought she'd bought herself with the bridge loan, she ended up with less breathing room than she'd started with. Not more. I'll be honest, I didn't take any pleasure hearing those numbers. A man who's built something with his own hands doesn't enjoy watching somebody else's finances come apart, even somebody who wronged him. What I felt was something closer to grim recognition. The same feeling you get when you've told somebody all season a section of fence is about to go, and they didn't listen, and then the fence goes exactly the way you said it would. Not satisfaction. Just the quiet confirmation that the structure was never as solid as the person standing on it believed. Dean Ashworth called me himself, about 3 weeks after Thanksgiving. I hadn't expected that call, and I want to tell you, some part of me braced for another round of the same anger he'd shown at that table. "Roger," he said when I picked up, and his voice had none of that edge left in it. "I owe you a conversation, and I've been putting it off because I didn't know how to start it." "Go ahead, Dean," I told him. I said some things at that table I shouldn't have said, he told me. I was defending my daughter, and I still think a father's got a right to do that. But I didn't know the whole picture that day. And now that I do, I understand why you did what you did the way you did it. 4 years of silence isn't the same as 4 years of hiding something wrong. I see that now. I told him I appreciated him saying so, and I meant it. Because a man admitting he was wrong out loud to somebody he's got no obligation to call at all is its own kind of quiet courage. The same kind I've always respected most in people. Carol wanted me to tell you something else too, Dean said. She's been sitting with Brooke twice a week since Thanksgiving, going through the numbers together. All of it. The loan, the listing fee, the whole $22,000 behind. She said to tell you, watching her daughter finally lay it all out on the table, she understood for the first time what you must have felt, watching this family for years and never saying a word about what you already knew. I sat with that call a long while after we hung up, thinking about how strange it is, the way a hard truth, once it's finally out in the open, tends to pull people closer together instead of driving them apart, provided everybody involved is willing to look at it honestly instead of looking away. Carol herself called a week after that, mostly to ask about Eleanor. She said Brooke had asked her, more than once since Thanksgiving, what kind of woman my late wife actually was, beyond the composition books and the ledger entries, and Carol wanted to be able to answer that honestly for her daughter's sake. She was the most patient woman I ever knew, I told Carol, and the most exact. She could tell you off the top of her head what a single calf sold for in any given year of our marriage, and she could also tell you exactly how somebody was feeling from across a crowded room just by the set of their shoulders. Most people are good at one of those things. She was good at both, her whole life. Carol thanked me for that, said she'd pass it along to Brooke, and I want to tell you I found myself glad to give it. To Eleanor's memory was never something I meant to wall off from the people who wronged me. It was always meant to be a measuring stick, something for a family to grow toward, once they were ready to actually look at it honestly instead of past it. Tyler and Brooke didn't separate, not in any legal sense. Tyler told me a few weeks later, sitting at my kitchen table again over coffee that actually got drunk this time, that things between them had changed in ways that would take a long while to work through. Brooke started seeing a financial counsellor at her own mother's insistence, began the slow, unglamorous work of actually disclosing every account and every debt to her own husband. Something that should have happened years before it did. She's not a bad person, Dad, Tyler told me that afternoon. She's scared, and she's been scared for a long time, and she made a bad decision out of that fear instead of just telling me the truth. I don't know if that makes it okay, but I don't think it makes her evil either. I never said she was evil, I told him. I said she made a claim on something that wasn't hers to claim, and the truth needed to catch up with that claim before it did real damage. What you two do with your marriage from here, that's between the two of you. It always was. I was never trying to end anything, Tyler. I was only ever trying to protect one thing that was never in question to begin with. He nodded at that, slow. I could see him turning something over, the way a man does when he's finally ready to say something he's been putting off. I want you to teach June about the ranch, he said. The real parts, the ledgers, the water rights, all of it. Not because of the trust, I mean, I know now the cabin's already hers someday regardless of anything I do, but because she asked me last week if she could come out and help you check fence some Saturday. And I realised I never once asked to do that with you at her age. Look how that turned out. I told him I'd be glad to. More glad than I let my voice show. There's a particular kind of joy in an old man's life when he gets to pass down the only inheritance that actually matters. Never the acreage, never the appraised value, the knowing how, the reading of weather and ledgers and people. It took me 50 years to earn, and I'd give it away for free to anybody patient enough to sit still and learn it. June started coming out most Saturdays that winter, bundled up against the cold in her father's old coat, sitting beside me on the ATV as we checked the fence line, asking questions about the herd count, about the water rights filings, about the exact difference between a debt and a mortgage, and a lien. Things most 13-year-olds never think to ask, and most adults never bother explaining clearly. I taught her to read a cloud bank the way my own father taught me, the flat grey underbelly, the speed of the wind at different altitudes, the 6-hour window you get, if you're paying attention, before the county even issues its warning. I took her by the co-op office one Saturday in January, mostly so Hank could meet her properly, since he'd heard so much about her over the years without ever putting a face to the name. Hank shook her hand like she was already a grown rancher, which pleased her more than any toy or trinket would have. Your grandpa here, Hank told her, moved 210 head off that North Ridge 6 hours before the county even knew a freeze was coming. You believe that? He does that all the time, June said, matter of fact, the way a kid says something they've simply always known to be true. He says the sky tells you everything if you actually look at it, instead of just glancing. Hank laughed at that and told her she'd been paying closer attention to her grandfather than half the grown men on that co-op board ever had. And I want to tell you, hearing my own words come back to me through a 13-year-old girl, spoken with that kind of plain confidence, did something to me that no folder, no trust document, no dollar figure ever could. It told me Eleanor's judgment, all those years back on that drive past Chugwater, had been exactly right. June was the one still standing in the barn at 5 a.m, and she'd been standing there, in her own way, long before either of us ever thought to test it. Grandma used to do this with you too, June said to me one Saturday in December. More statement than question, watching a storm build over the western ridge the way I'd taught her to watch it. She kept every number this ranch ever generated in her own handwriting. For 42 years, I told her. She used to say the land doesn't care who works it hardest. It only knows who shows up. You've been showing up your whole life, June, longer than you probably realise. She smiled at that, quiet and pleased, the particular way a 13-year-old girl smiles when an adult finally says out loud something she suspected about herself but never heard confirmed. I told her that same Saturday a little more about the trust itself, in plain terms, a 13-year-old could hold on to, that the cabin and the 5 acres around it would be hers outright once she turned 25, free and clear, no debt attached, no claim anybody else could ever make against it. She took that news the way she takes most things, quietly, turning it over before she spoke. "Is that why you never explained the cabin thing to Dad?" she asked. "Partly," I told her. "Partly it was your grandmother's wish, protecting you before anybody knew they'd need protecting. And partly, June, it's because some gifts mean more when they arrive without a lot of noise around them. You'll understand that better when you're the one deciding what to pass down to somebody else, someday." She nodded slowly, filing that away the way she files away most things I tell her. And I could see, watching her, that whatever else came of that whole difficult season, at least one person in this family was going to grow up understanding exactly what quiet, patient love actually looks like, instead of only ever hearing about it secondhand. One more thing before I close this out, because it's the part that matters most to me. More than the folder, more than the trust, more even than watching Brooke's finances come apart the way they did. The Saturday before Christmas, Tyler drove out to the ranch with both kids, June and Wyatt. Brooke came too, which surprised me some. I wasn't sure how I'd feel seeing her again after everything. She stood in my kitchen a little stiffly at first. The kids ran off to find the barn cats. Tyler busied himself with the coffee pot to give us a minute alone. "I owe you an apology," Brooke said, "and I know that's not enough. I know I can't undo what I tried to do or how I did it. But I want you to know, Roger, I never set out to hurt you. I set out to fix a problem I was too ashamed to admit I had. I did it in the worst possible way. I understand if that's not something you're ready to forgive." I looked at her a long moment. This woman who'd banned me from my own family's Thanksgiving table, 12 words at a time, who tried to pledge land that was never hers, against a debt she'd hidden from her own husband for the better part of a year. I thought about Eleanor's letter, about counting the people who show up before the money and the people who show up after. Watching Brooke stand in my kitchen with genuine shame written plain across her face, I thought maybe there was a third kind of person Eleanor hadn't quite named in that letter, the kind who shows up after the money, after the fear, after the whole thing's already fallen apart, and tries, however late, to become one of the ones who was always supposed to be there. "I'm not going to pretend the last 2 months didn't happen," I told her, "and I'm not going to pretend I trust you the way I might have trusted you 7 years ago, before any of this. Trust like that, once it's spent, you earn it back slow, $1 at a time, same as anything else worth having. But you're my son's wife. You're the mother of my grandchildren. I'm not in the business of holding a door shut forever against somebody who's finally trying to walk through it, honestly." She nodded, eyes wet, and didn't say anything more. I think that was right. Some moments don't need more words piled onto them. They just need to be allowed to sit, the way you let a good weld cool before you test whether it holds. Wyatt, my grandson, came to me separately that same Saturday before Christmas, while his sister and Tyler and Brooke were still finding their footing in the kitchen. He's 10, quieter than June, more interested in the barn cats than in ledgers or fence lines, and I want to tell you, I've made a point of never treating that as a lesser thing. Eleanor used to say every child on a working ranch finds their own way to belong to it, and some belong to the animals, and some belong to the numbers, and neither one is worth less than the other. "Grandpa," he said, "is Mom in trouble forever now?" I crouched down to his level, the way Constance had crouched down to June's at that Thanksgiving table, because some questions deserve to be answered eye to eye. "No," I told him. Your mum made a mistake, a big one, but a mistake isn't the same as being broken forever. She's working hard to fix it. That's actually a braver thing than never making the mistake at all, because fixing something takes more courage than avoiding it in the first place. He thought about that a while, the way 10-year-olds do, turning her idea over slowly until it either fits or doesn't. Like when I broke the fence gate and had to tell you instead of hiding it. He finally said, "Exactly like that," I told him, and he seemed satisfied with the comparison, and went off to find the barn cats with his sister. And I stood there a moment thinking how children so often find the plainest, truest way to say something that took the adults around them months of dressed-up language to arrive at. I want to close with where I started, because I think it's the fairest way to leave you with the whole shape of this. They banned me from Thanksgiving. My own son's wife. 12 words on a phone screen. I let it happen without a single raised voice, because I'd already spent 4 years making sure that whatever storm came for this family, the ground under it would hold. I never threw a punch through any of this. I never once raised my voice. Not at Brooke. Not at Tyler. Not at Dean Ashworth. Across that kitchen table I wasn't even present for. The only weapons I ever used were the same ones I've used my whole life. Cold patience. Ruthless attention to the facts. And the plain truth, laid out where everybody could see it, in my late wife's own handwriting, if it needed to be. Sometimes the truest words in a man's arsenal were never his own to begin with. They belonged to the woman who saw it all coming, years before he did. Split Creek Ranch is still mine. Still running 400 head across 1,000 acres. I built from 80 leased acres and 11 cattle, and a lot of years nobody else was watching. The homestead cabin still sits quiet in its stand of cottonwoods, waiting for a 13-year-old girl to turn 25 and inherit it free and clear, the way her great-great-grandfather built it to be somebody's someday. Every Saturday this winter, weather allowing, I've had company on that ATV checking fence. A granddaughter who shows up before anybody asks her to, learning to read a storm 6 hours before the county catches up. I don't know exactly what next Thanksgiving will look like. Maybe it'll be a full table again. Tyler and Brooke and the kids, and me, the empty chair finally filled the ordinary way. Maybe it'll take longer than one holiday season for all of that to mend all the way through. I've learned, at 72 years old, not to force a timeline on things that need to heal at their own pace. The same way I've learned not to pour concrete before the ground's properly settled. It never holds right if you rush it. But I know this much for certain. Nobody in this family will ever again mistake my quiet for confusion, or my patience for weakness, or my calm for something that can be managed around. I read the weather 6 hours before the warning comes. I read people the same way. I always have. The ones who forget that tend to learn it the same way Brooke did, at their own table. On a holiday, in front of everyone who mattered, when the truth finally arrives to collect what it was always owed. Last Sunday, Tyler called and asked if the whole family could come out for the day. Not for any occasion, just a regular Sunday. June and Wyatt and Brooke and him. A full table again. In the house I built for a wife who spent 42 years keeping every ledger straight so that whoever stood in that barn at 5 a.m. would always have solid ground under them. I said yes. I told him to bring nothing, that I still remembered how to cook a decent Sunday dinner, even after all these years of eating alone. And he laughed and said he'd bring the pie anyway. Because some habits from that particular Thanksgiving were apparently going to stick around whether I wanted them to or not. I don't chase the storm. I never have. I just get the herd in before it hits. Then I stand at the fence line at first light, and I watch to see who's still standing when it's passed. This year, more of them were still standing than I expected. And for an old man who spent one lonely Thanksgiving eating a cold plate alone at his own kitchen table, that turned out to be more than enough.